Hello and welcome to the BIBA Pod. This podcast is where current insurance industry challenges are discussed ahead of BIBA Conference 2024. The conference theme is What's Next? And in this series, we'll be interviewing insurance professionals shaping our future as an industry.
Good morning, Adam. Thank you very much for joining us for this episode of BIBA Pod, where we're talking about all things motor. And I'm quite excited to learn from you, but I wonder before we start, if you could just give us a bit of an overview about your background and expertise in this area.
Yeah, by all means. So nice to speak to you. So I'm Adam Beckett. I'm the Chief Distribution Officer here at Ageas, where I've been for about 3 years or so. But been in the general insurance marketplace for 25 years. So frightening to say, but enjoying it as much today as I ever have. My responsibility is I look after all distribution channels to market. So all our broker and intermediary partners, affinities, etc. And then our marketing, our proposition development and our digital execution. So, and work hand in hand with our pricing and underwriting team. So very much exposed to motor strongly on a day-to-day basis. And Ageas is a multi-product insurer, but we are very much specialists in the motor landscape. So as you'd expect, we've got a quite a clear view on how we see things emerging and the future of brokers within it.
I'm quite interested in electric vehicles and how the emerging risk of that landscape looks. And I did do a podcast about a year ago on this topic. So I'm quite interested to see. I mean, it's such a rapidly moving industry, isn't it? So tell me a little bit about what's next. Are we going to have driverless cars? Are we going to be all electric? And what does that look like from an insurance perspective?
Yeah, I mean, so what I would say is you've got a number of things happening. So you've got changes in driving habits, which I'll come back to, but you've also got the government's impending ban on petrol and diesel new car sales, effectively, that will inevitably accelerate the switch to EVs. And there's probably a couple of things to draw out there, which I think are really pertinent to insurance today. So the first one is making sure that we and others are offering policies to cover electric vehicles. That's something we're doing and a number of other insurers are doing, but it's still very much a learning process. So lots of insurance companies investing in loss ratio, if you like, to test and learn and understand the dynamics of managing insurance provision for electric vehicles as more and more of them get on the road. And I think one of the reasons that's ever more important is being able to repair electric vehicles in the event where a customer does make a claim and they've had an accident. That is considerably more expensive than it is for a standard ICE-based vehicle, if you like. So the key differences there are that repairing an EV is just inherently more expensive. So aside from the battery costs, which are obviously quite high, the ability to take electric vehicles apart, to check the damage and to repair for it, and then to be comfortable that it's not affected the integrity of the battery, means that we are seeing more of those vehicles have a higher repair cost, but we're also seeing them being written off more often than a traditional ICE vehicle might be. So that doesn't affect the ability of insurers to cover this segment in the future. Of course, it will need to, but it does mean that understanding the costs of doing that and the technology needed to be able to repair them faster and more efficiently has got to come through. And that's going to need diagnostics to increase the repairability. It's going to need exploring the possible reuse of batteries or the assessment of damage on batteries and things in a careful way. And I think there's probably in part the fact that that isn't as mature a muscle at the moment as it needs to be in the future is why electric vehicles are more expensive to repair. Of course, we're seeing a lot of those vehicles come onto the road new through salary sacrifice type schemes, through employers, etc., where customers aren't really exposed to the insurance in the same way because it's all bundled up, if you like, into one price with servicing and tyres and everything else that goes with it. But it is going to need the consumer to be able to access affordable insurance when there are more of these on the road than there are today. And of course, the other thing to say is there isn't really a used market for EVs at the moment. So if you think about the cycle times of new cars going into the used car market, we're still quite early in that cycle. So the used market is not very mature. We're also seeing EV vehicles move from more prestige brands or more prestige priced vehicles, which is probably in part why salary sacrifice has been the access route for so many of them, to now some of the more mainstream brands and mainstream models having electric vehicles. So we're going to see that scaling. What I would say is the scaling of it will also be commensurate with infrastructure. So the level of infrastructure investment isn't probably as high as or happening as quickly as it needs to. And I think that's why we are seeing also quite a heavy growth in hybrid vehicles. So people who are buying vehicles with electrification in them, but also the ability to switch across to petrol power if they need to manage the journeys that they need to take. So there's lots going on in the space of electric vehicles, if you like, for all the insurers. And I'm sure come BIBA in May, it's going to be a really popular topic of conversation.
I wonder about the data, because you said it's a relatively new industry. We haven't got into the used kind of market as much, and I know that there's a lot of trust issues around the battery for users in terms of how expensive it is, how quickly it dies, and all of that kind of stuff. What will happen there over the next 5 years?
So I think as the diagnostic capability from repair networks and from manufacturers improves, if you like, the methods of how these things are manufactured and repaired, I think that will bring through more data that can be pressed out to the consumer and the intermediary, the broker, whoever it is that's looking at it, to be able to give confidence to the consumer about the viability of that vehicle and the battery. So a good example would be if you and I wanted to buy a second-hand electric car, knowing the validity of that battery and its life and how safe it is going to be a really important part of us buying a used vehicle, isn't it? So that data being simplified and more regularly available to the consumer, I think, is going to be incredibly important. And there's a huge, I don't want to give the impression that there isn't massive amounts of work going on through manufacturers, through insurers, through organizations like Thatcham and the like, who are really getting under the skin and understanding the detail of this, as is a lot of the government activity. But it's got to get to a level of maturity quite quickly, I think, because you're right, over a 5-year period, that used car market particularly is going to develop.
Talk to me about the challenges and the opportunities facing brokers over the next 5 years whilst we build this data and understanding of the market.
Yeah, I mean, I think the challenge to start with there is that the broker could well be asked in that model where they are, supporting the customer with their education and their choice around insurance, questions that they don't necessarily feel armed to be able to respond to. The opportunity is if manufacturers, insurers, etc., can bring that knowledge to brokers, and they can do their own development work about helping people through the decision of purchasing an electric vehicle and everything that goes with it, then they can be a real power base, if you like, for helping customers to find comfort and to navigate the landscape. And that set of data requirements is going to be quite different. It's not simply about the insurance and what the right insurance choice is and the premium that goes with it, etc. It's going to get into range anxiety. It's going to get into how do I get the electric point installed in my home? What do I do if I live on a public street without having a private driveway? It's going to get into choosing the right vehicle for the type of lifestyle that people lead, etc. So the broker here, whether an online broker or whether somebody doing a face-to-face transaction in regional offline, can add some real valuable proposition and service information beyond the provision of the traditional insurance cover.
You did mention earlier about the change in driving habits, and presumably that's all the things you're just talking about. I'm now not worried about the price of petrol going up. I'm worried that my hybrid vehicle's only got 20 miles in the tank, but the petrol tank is also really small as well. So how do I make these long journeys and that kind of stuff? How does that affect things? You touched on it slightly. I just wonder if we can go into a bit more detail.
Yeah, so it's certainly something we're seeing from the salary sacrifice providers that we're working with, where they are having to be able to answer the question of pure electric, mild hybrid, full hybrid, etc. They're having to help people get used to what all those types of vehicles are, and then to match them to whether it's for the school run, whether it's for long journeys, whether there's an international element, etc. So increasingly there are people doing that, and actually some of the direct retail insurers are doing that particularly well. So, making sure they've got information provision on their websites where they are specialising more, if you like, in electric vehicles. That's probably not us. So we're making electric vehicles part of our underwriting footprint for all our key distribution partners, and we are increasing the volume of that we do. But we're not trying to take necessarily a market leadership position at the moment, because there is still so much to learn. But we are going to increasingly support our brokers in the provision of information to help them manage their customers through that choice.
So supporting brokers through this is quite key. And you've mentioned BIBA coming up next month. What are your key messages at conference?
Well, so I think it's fair to say that the key message for us is that we fundamentally believe in the longevity of brokers in the personal lines marketplace. Our business is entirely intermediated. So even our small direct franchise, if you like, is intermediated through the price comparison website. And 8-9/10 of our business comes through the thousands of personal lines brokers that will be in the room at BIBA. We are focused on investing in all the technical capability that we need to, pricing, underwriting, claims management, data analytics, etc., to be able to be a great technical support and panel partner, if you like, for those brokers. We'll leave the very entrepreneurial skill of proposition and distribution and the retailing to the broker, because we fundamentally believe that they have continually shown themselves to be successful there. And one of the key messages in the room will be our total commitment to personal lines broking. We're one of only 2 insurers at this stage committed to BIBA's manifesto pledge, to remain committed, if you like, to the personal lines broker channel. And we will invest in all the capabilities that empower the broker to be as successful as some of the large direct writers are as insurers, through the capability that we can bring them. So, people coming to our stand at BIBA, and we hope it's as buoyant as it was over the last couple of years, can absolutely expect to hear that message from us. And equally, they can expect to see all of our senior team able to engage on the expertise of, whether it's electric vehicles or whether it's some of the other trends and things we're seeing in motor. And it's interesting because you were talking about some of the other trends. I think the other one we think is particularly interesting is the rise of short-term insurance. So rather than the type of vehicle that you're choosing, increasingly we are seeing lots of growth from people taking short periods of insurance for different lifestyle use cases. And actually some of that coming through where, in a cost of living crisis and where inflation in insurance particularly is high, people may be making choices to have fewer vehicles in the household, but actually, insuring different members of the family at different times on those vehicles. So my own use case is my daughter's come home from university, short-term insurance, adding her on for a period of time when she needs to use one of the cars is a lot cheaper than buying another vehicle when it's sitting there for most of the year and being unused. So the driving habits and behaviours of consumers are changing. So traditional 12-month insurance will always be very important, but there are now changing models, and particularly short-term insurance we're seeing large growth in, as we are telematics, etc., as people try to make insurance more affordable.
I've had a few really interesting conversations around this topic recently, and I was talking to somebody who was talking about the hard-soft cycle is not what's happening here. We are having a fundamental shift of the entire industry. And I was just, that conversation was so interesting. And when you apply it to things like parametric insurance, you apply it to things like just the change in buying habits. You look at things like Amazon and how that's adapted to different buying needs. And it astounds me. My brother lives in London, doesn't need a car, but came home and wanted to borrow my car. This is going to sound awful on an insurance podcast, and I couldn't remember who I was insured with, and I was too busy to go and look for the documents. So I said to him, you figure it out. And I didn't even realize that it would be something he could do. Just go to someone completely unseparate from me, give my registration plate and say, I want this for 24 hours. And I was a little bit astounded by that, but shouldn't be, given the industry that we work in and the conversations I have. But I was like, oh yeah, this is adapting to the need.
Well, and if you think about it, it's kind of an insurance view of the on-demand society, isn't it? So, in everything in life now, we have an expectation that we can kind of get what we need when we need it. And that is a good example of it. So, a few of the insurers we work with literally are app based. They're asking a few simple questions, and within 5 minutes, you can be able to jump straight in that car and drive it away. I'm probably doing them a disservice with 5 minutes, to be honest. Some of it's even quicker than that. So our view is, do we need to adapt to electric vehicles, autonomous vehicles, etc.? Yes, of course we do, as those trends come through and grow, and of course EV very much with us. But we also need to respond in a way that says we've got the right type of insurance policies for people's changing buying behaviours and habits.
Yeah, we haven't even touched on driverless vehicles and when you think that's coming in.
Well, it's a great question, isn't it? The government have launched a new automated vehicles bill, which is very much kind of setting a tone, I think, for how this might look at a UK level. Self-driving is there in many facets already, isn't it? So I know in my car it will change the lane for me, it will park it for me when I'm there, or it'll push me back in the lane if I drift. So there's some things that are starting to emerge, and of course there's lots of electric vehicles, particularly on the road, that have got some autonomous capability. How much that is usable today on British roads is still to be clarified. I think what it is going to need, though, is really clear regulation and safe, sustainable adoption to be in place. So that government bill definitely has safety very much at the core of it. And I think that we are going to see year on year new models coming out with more of that capability. I still think we're some way away from fully autonomous vehicles. I can see it in urban centres sooner rather than later. You can see it in public transport, perhaps before privately insured cars. And of course, there's lots of insurers, ourselves included, who are investing in what the future of that might look like. But there are some quite big questions to answer around this. So data here, another good example of where data is going to be absolutely integral to the decision. So, where does the data ownership sit? Connectivity of these cars, if you're sat in them but it's driving itself, where does the liability lie for that? What risk might there be of cyber threat? I don't want to create a kind of future science fiction view of it, but there are some quite different questions here that need to be answered. And there's probably still, as well, slightly differently to EV, there are some infrastructure questions about, might there be certain roads where certain lanes allow it? I could definitely see it coming in urban centres before rural areas, if you like. But it's an emerging area that insurers have to invest in. We're doing that not just locally in the UK, but as part of an international group, as are our competitors and peers. And we're working closely with in industry experts, if you like, to understand the implications of it, which aren't traditional industry experts. It's people in energy supply, motor manufacturers, local government planning, areas where you need to think quite differently about how this might come about. But fully autonomous vehicles, probably a way off, stepping through all the different horizons of it. It's technology marches upon us really quickly, doesn't it?
Well, it's computers on wheels, really, isn't it? That's essentially where we're getting to, and the change in everything from how you buy, how you use, what the risks are, is just so huge. We can't possibly sort of see where we're going to be in 10 years. And I think it'd be fabulous for us to do a podcast every 2 years to reflect back on where we were. Do you remember when we were saying that autonomous vehicles would be coming in urban areas? And now the whole world is run by it. I think that would be quite an exciting podcast to do.
I absolutely agree. I mean, am I expecting on the BIBA stand in May for us to have a lot of autonomous vehicle insurance inquiries? Probably not. But am I expecting to see them on EVs and then on short-term insurance and then on the early adopting technologies in cars, changing the way that they're self-controlled? Yeah, absolutely. And that's, as you say, who would have said some years ago that the phone in our hand would have done everything it does, right? It's going to come upon us really quickly. So
it absolutely is, and I'm quite equally excited and terrified to see where it goes for my children starting to drive and all of that kind of stuff. But it's good to know and see the work that's being done out there, because your average Joe, i.e. me, doesn't see or know what's going on behind the scenes. And I think it's really helpful. And it's also helpful to hear it from someone like yourself, so that when you are a broker and you're advising your clients, you can say, you know, the landscape is changing. This is where we're going. This is what we're looking at. So bear these, you know, factors in mind when you're looking at what you're going to buy. So I think it'd be really exciting. I think you should have lots of conversations around this at BIBA.
We'll be in our usual bright colours and with a theme of brilliant together this year. So our view is that we cannot be successful without our intermediary partners. So how do we successfully work together in the brilliant way we do today, and how do we evolve that for all the things we've been talking about so far, but also just today, day to day in the trading in what is such an extraordinary market. I know we say it every year, but it certainly has been over the last few years.
And if you've got any questions about electric vehicles, short-term insurance, Adam's your man. Go and have a chat. Adam, it's been really lovely speaking to you. Thank you very much for your time.
No problem. Great to catch up. I hope to see you walking the corridors in Manchester in a few weeks.
Absolutely.
We hope you enjoyed this episode. If you want to hear more, please click on the subscribe button on your chosen streaming platform and follow us on our socials, including YouTube. We hope to see you at conference in Manchester on the 15th and 16th of May. If you have any questions at all, you can find out where to contact us on BIBA Conference at bibaconference.org.uk/contact.